Hello and welcome to another update. In this one I'll be covering the whole front line, starting out in the north. We're here by the Kreminna front. Fighting continues on the whole front line as the Russian forces continue their attacks in the direction of Makiivka as well as Nevsky, northwest and southwest of Chernopopivka, west of Kreminna in the direction of Sarishne, south of Dibrova, where there's been this photo of Russian artillery strikes on Ukrainian positions, and it was geolocated to be around right here. Then we also see fighting here west of Shipilivka in the Serebryansky forest area, and fighting continues in the direction of Bilorivka as well as Verkhnokamiansk. Then we move on to the Bakhmut front, where the Russian forces continue their attacks to the north of Sereshnyansk by the E40 highway in Oryhovo-Vasilivka, in between Oryhovo-Vasilivka and Hryhorivka, as well as in the direction of Hryhorivka from the Dubovo-Vasilivka area. South of Bogdanivka, where there's been some video of Ukrainian shelling on Russian positions here to the north of the road. Then we move on to fighting by Khomove, and then within the city itself there's been a few slight map corrections. The front line moved a bit more further to the right and further north here in this direction. So some places the Russians had captured more, other places they had captured less. And then we see here this slight advance to the southwestern district. The most interesting part is that there's reported to be the heaviest fighting by Rose Alley, which is this park area here to the west by the youth center. And the fighting here is very intense as the Russian forces are trying to reach southwards and capture this area here. As you can see, there's a specific zone west of this area, and these have more fortified positions compared to the rest. By capturing this and the eastern parts, they'll be able to essentially cut off this whole area, similar to what they did in the south, where they advanced on the important parts and then the rest would just force the Ukrainians to withdraw, capturing those positions without any issues. It looks like they want to do the same here, where they want to capture the western and eastern parts, so here to the west and here to the east, which will allow them to force the Ukrainians to retreat from this area here in the center to the better positions in this area right here, which would give Russian forces control over this whole area. Then we see heavy fighting as well by the Bakhmut train station 1, which is here in the eastern area. And we see that the Russian forces are heavily continuing their fighting by these two areas as they try to advance in the north of the city. At the same time, fighting continues here in the center itself, where the Russian forces are continuing both in the eastern parts as well as in the southern parts, where the Russian forces are trying to gain control over the southern stadium and advance towards the central stadium here in Bakhmut. And they're now fighting by this area right by the stadium here in the center, and they're fighting here in the eastern parts of the stadium as well as geolocated information of Russian forces and Ukrainian forces clashing right by this wall right here, right between the street and this area. So the fighting has actually reached this area as well, as both sides fight over the control over this part of the city. So essentially what we can conclude is that there is heavy fighting ongoing within Bakhmut, and that the Russian forces are heavily trying to take control over the city before the upcoming Ukrainian offensive. Then we also see fighting here by the southwestern outskirts, and there's this video here of drone footage within the city itself. Now we can see from this drone footage that the city in these residential areas is completely destroyed. It's not leveled to the ground, but there's hole in essentially every single building, and that it is complete destruction within the city itself, but mostly the residential areas at the outskirts, as those are the areas where the Russian forces have advanced within and have destroyed the Ukrainian positions defending those areas, forcing them to retreat as the Russian forces advanced within the areas. So essentially what we're seeing is results of this artillery-style warfare, where the goal is to destroy the enemy positions rather than taking them. Moving on, the fighting also continues in the direction of Ivanivsky and between Ivanivsky and Bakhmut, as the Russian forces are attempting to advance to the south of the TO504 highway, where they're trying to cut off the connection between Ivanivsky and Bakhmut itself. Further south, we see in the direction of Avdiivka, fighting continues both in the direction of Novokalinove as well as in the direction of Stepove, north of Vytne in the direction of Avdiivka, in the direction of Severnev from the Vodiana area. Continuous fighting in Pervomaisk itself, both to the north, the center, and in the south in the direction of Nevelske. As for Kamyanka, there has been contradicting news. Some sources report that the Russian forces have taken control over the village, and this is according to a pro-Ukrainian source as well as Rybar themselves. So essentially, I have put a question mark to show that I'm questioning the authenticity of the report, and I'm waiting for confirmation by either Deep State Map or Syriac Maps. Then we move on to the Marinka area, where here the Russian forces continue their attacks both to the north, the center, and to the south in the direction of Pobieda, as well as fighting continues in the direction of Novomikhailivka, as well as Uledar here to the south. So that is the general update for the front line today. Then we move on to this area by Zaporizhzhia, where there are two reports. The first one is that there's a video of Russian Air Force run, whereas two planes bomb some positions of Ukrainian forces here in this front line. I'm not exactly sure where it is, but it is on the Zaporizhzhia front. And then there's this report here. So according to two different sources, the Ukrainian forces are preparing for the offensive, and it is coming very soon. And that is because first we have this one. They report on combat readiness in all directions and the likely start of the offensive of the armed forces of Ukraine. Today there were radio interceptions of enemy communications, which also indicated preparations for an offensive. So essentially, according to Russian sources, they are expecting Ukrainian offensive to start very soon, as the Ukrainian forces have gathered enough troops. They are preparing and they are in combat readiness positions. And if we look at the temperature and weather in Zaporizhzhia, it is rain from Wednesday to Tuesday. So I'm not exactly sure if this is the greatest time to start an offensive, but at the same time, the Ukrainians claim they would do a spring offensive, so they probably already took the weather into account, that they expect it to be muddy, to be rainy, and so on. So they may have a plan around it, but essentially, the rain is so heavy that it is very difficult for heavy equipment to go through the fuels in this area. And going through the highways would also be risky because the Russian forces have most likely mined the whole areas, as well as them having to split up in fairly large distances. If we use the Deep State Map, we can see that the areas between the Russian positions, there are 20 kilometers in between the roads, 17 kilometers. So there's large distances between the different roads that the Ukrainian forces can advance through. So essentially what we would see if they advanced within this current weather conditions where the ground will be muddy, they would have to go through the roads. So they will be going to these three locations, and every one of them would be leading towards Tokmak as well as Melitopol. So essentially, in such a situation, the Ukrainian forces will have to focus on the roads. So there would be 17 kilometers to the east distance between the forces and 20 kilometers to the west the distance between the forces. So the Ukrainian forces would have to split up into three groups, and each of them would be separate from the other, which means that the Russian forces can focus on one at a time, taking the western flank, for example, and having Tokmak defend against the two others, and then focus on the eastern or the central one after taking down one of the axes. So essentially, this offensive would have to be heavily coordinated, and they would need to have much superior forces since they are on the offensive. And at the same time, they don't have air superiority. They don't have any of these things that supplement an offensive. So it will be a very difficult offensive. And comparing it to Kharkiv or Kherson, where in Kherson, the Russian forces were essentially mostly cut off from their own supplies, and they were significantly undermanned. And in the Kharkiv offensive, where the Ukrainian forces had a significant larger force, and the Russian forces were completely unprepared. For this one, the Russian forces are prepared. They are fully equipped. They are fully manned. They have air superiority. They have everything they need to counter this offensive. So I'd be very surprised if the Ukrainians actually managed to come out with a successful offensive on this part of the front line. But I'm not taking any cards off the table because they have shown that they're capable of finding the best time to strike and getting success from that. So I'm leaving the cards on the table. I'm not showing what I have, and you guys have to just see what happens, and I'll be reporting on what happens instead of any speculation as to the results of the offensive. However, it is most likely coming, and it's most likely coming soon. Also, a quick clarification. In my last video, I said I had been challenged to hit 100,000 subscribers before the 20th of April. Just to clear it up, it has nothing to do with historical figures' birthdays, and it has everything to do with that I am currently in Ramadan, and it is estimated to finish the 20th or 21st. So then there will be the Eid al-Fitr, which is the holiday for Muslims. So I want to hit 100,000 subscribers before the Muslim holiday, not before a historical figure's birthday. And that is all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.